Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Persecution Report. Let us give our audience about 30 seconds of time for them to join in, and then we will begin our discussion. So, how is everyone doing today?
Good.
Very well.
Thank you.
World Cup fever going on in high speed. Very
How are
good
you
to see.
doing, Rahul bhai, where you are?
What was that?
How are you doing where you are?
Good. It's all good. It's good to see you all. I haven't seen you in forever and half.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we can begin now. Excuse me. Second. Excuse me. So again, good evening to everyone who's watching us live and who will hopefully watch us later on all around the globe. Welcome to the Persecution Report. 2 years ago, this summer, the women of this country were on the streets. We all know that. They held ground in July of 2024 alongside everyone else. They absorbed the batons and worse. And I want to be precise about something before we go further. This was not a meeting, this was not a country, how to frame it? This was not a country meeting women's political power for the first time. It was not the first time. Under 17 years or so of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government, a woman sat in the speaker's chair, a woman ran the foreign ministry, later a woman ran the education ministry, a woman ran the home ministry, and a woman led the opposition in parliament. What July gave women was not new power. It was a different kind of visibility, claimed in the street rather than granted from above. Then came August 5th, and somewhere between that day and this one, the country women helped build started forgetting they were even in the room. Tonight, our episode, we're calling it Visible in July, Invisible Sins. Because that is what the record actually shows. Not one villain, not one government's failure, a pattern that survived a change of power, a change of party, and great many promises. So over the next hour, we'll walk through what actually happened to women's political power after the July movement. We'll try to put names and dates to some of the cases that made headlines this year, from a widow in Kaliganj to two 8-year-old girls whose cases moved at completely different speeds. Look at what happens. Look at what happens to women online when they report an assault instead of staying quiet. And we'll try to trace how a promise made by one government survived, mostly untouched, into the next one. And we're going to ask a question we do not hear asked enough on this topic. Where are the embassies that lectured the rest of the world on human rights? And why have they had so little to say about any of what is happening in Bangladesh in terms of our topic? I'm very happy to say I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Anwar Sadat Jihan, who has put together a short data walk to open us up, and by two panelists doing the real work in this space. Good to have you, Jihan. You are mute.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you for connecting today. and it's really good to be here. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. And then we have Priyanka Anberg, an IT security engineer who has tracked what has happened to women online since 2024. Welcome to the show, Miss Anberg.
Thank you, Jamal bhai. It's an honor to be with you and all of my colleagues here.
So good to have you. And finally, we have Jasmine Chaudhary, a senior public health practitioner based in the UK, who has spent years tracking exactly what we're about to discuss through public health data and from the vantage point of the diaspora. As always, it is good to have you with us, Ms. Chaudhary.
Thank you, Dr. Jamil. It's a privilege to join you and the distinguished panel for this important discussion. This is an issue. The issue we're exploring today is deeply important to me, both on a personal note as well as professionally, as it lies at the heart of my work as a social justice campaigner and a public health practitioner.
I'm sure your role as a social justice campaigner is something that will make much sense to all of us in this discussion. So, very welcome to the show. So, as I look forward to listening to all of you with great interest, the first floor goes to Jihan. Jihan, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Jamil. So, first of all, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, sounds good. So, tonight's episode is about where women in Bangladesh currently stands. And to understand that, we have to go back to July 2024 and look at some data, and then you will see that it is clear where the women stands today. So let's start with July 2024. In July 2024, in the so-called protest, women were not any supporting caste. They were one of the primary leading forces. They were organizing their dormitories. They were running the supply lines on the streets. They were standing in front of police lines. So they were like one of the primary forces of that so-called protest. And these are all documented, well documented. These are not any folklore tale. So the question tonight is simple. What happened since July 2024 until now? And where are the women? And to understand that, we first have to look at the power itself. Look at the government, so-called interim administration of so-called Nobel laureate Dr. Muhammad Yunus. Dr. Muhammad Yunus, as we know, advertised himself his whole life as a pro-human rights champion, pro-women rights champion. But when we look at his administration, we only see there were 4 women out of the 22 advisors that sat in his advisory council. 4 out of 22. This is a meek 18%. 18% women and out of 22. Then from the advisory council of Dr. Muhammad Yunus, we come to the election of February 2026, this so-called sham election that they held. In this election, when you look at the data, you will see that out of 1,981 candidates, only 78 were women. It is only less than 4%. And majority of the party, 30 out of 51, there was not a single woman, not a single one. And Jamaat Islami, the open opponent of women rights, they claim that women are inferior, women cannot be in leadership. This is their philosophy, and it is completely visible in how they provided their candidate list in the election. There were 0 women out of 276. And when we come to today, the government that is running the country today, in this government, there are only 3 women in the cabinet. As you can see in this slide, there are only 3 women in the cabinet. This is the administration and government aspects of things, because that tells society how the society will run. And this is exactly visible from the violence against women. the data of violence against women. Bangladesh Mohila Parishad recorded 786 rape and gang rape cases in 2025 against the 516 in 2024. And most of those 516 happened after August 2024, after the democratically elected Awami League government was ousted. And more than half were minors, children. At the same time, Human Rights Watch also documented 706 or somewhere around there in 13 months total rape. This is the condition of women in terms of the violence that they're facing today. And why? To understand why, we have to look at who are running the show in the country, which elements are roaming free in society. In May 2025, the religious extremist Zealots group, Hefazat, held a rally. 22,000 Hefazat extremists attended that rally. In that rally, the folks openly claim that men and women can never be equal. Dr. Jamil, what is most shocking is that at that time, the government's own religious advisor, AFM Khalid Hussein, was a vice president of that organizing rally. And these are the people calling the shots, running the country today. It is visible from, again, some data of how the victims are receiving justice. For the little child in Magura, Asiya, and in Pallavi, Ramisa, they got the national attention. They got the Prime Minister's attention. And that's why it took 73 days to get a verdict on one case and 19 on the other. But Dr. Jamil, Daily Star, on their report, claim that there are more than 30,000 plus cases on the backlog. That means these 30,000 plus victims are not getting the same attention. So when we look at the overall thing, this is not we talking. If we look at what United Nations Women Organization, they said that the structural condition and structural barriers that are there in Bangladesh today would erase the leadership momentum that women built in July 2024. So that is why we are calling our episode today Visible in July, Invisible Since, because the women are nowhere to be found and they are not having the same level of protection as the other half in Bangladesh today. Back to you, Dr. Jamil.
Excellent and very disturbing portrayal of what has been happening, Jihan. Thank you so very much for sharing this with us. It is indeed astonishing for a country that was one of the biggest examples in today's world in terms of women empowerment and women leadership, specifically through the drives of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. We see what it has come down to. Thank you, Jihan. So now let us put some ground truth underneath the numbers and statistics that Jihan has shared. Ms. Chaudhary, I'd like to come to you now. You, as a health practice personnel, as a health equity proponent, you watch all of this from outside of Bangladesh, outside of the country, through the public health data. When you look at these numbers, like 4 out of 22 in the Jamaat Yunus administration, or then 30 of the 52 parties did not even nominating a female candidate in the national election, does that read to you like an oversight, or does it read like a decision to you?
Thank you, Dr. Jamil, for your question. So let me state clearly from the outset, it reads like a decision to me, not an oversight. And here's how I would frame it as a public health practitioner. When you talk about representation, having a voice is a determinant of health. So when women are not in the room where policy gets written, policy gets designed, the policies that follow do not protect women. Let's just be clear about that from the beginning. And this is not an opinion, it is a pattern I have seen throughout my career across every health system I have looked at. I would encourage framing this discussion also through the social justice lens, because this issue is much bigger than just electoral statistics. It's about the kind of society Bangladesh is becoming. So the figures themselves, as you've described, and Mr. Jihan has described throughout his presentation, are stark. Only 4 out of 22 parties have fielded any women candidates at all, and while 30 parties have fielded none. That is not simply a disappointing statistics, it is a profound democratic deficit. Women's equal participation in political life is the cornerstone of any representative democracy. So when so many political parties fail to nominate even a single woman, it raises serious questions about whether women's leadership is genuinely valued, whether they just will be excluded, silenced from positions and political power. And Bangladesh Mohila Parishad, as Mr. Jihan has alluded to, they asked this obvious question about a year ago when the National Consensus Commission was writing the rules for this very election that we are discussing. They asked, how do you write the rules for women's lives without a single woman writing them? The answer the country got back was a 5% minimum for women candidates. Most parties failed, as we know, did not meet that requirement. They failed to even meet that requirement. So when it came to the reserved seats, where carved up after the election, women's organizations had a name for this, a charity quota, not power. It was viewed as an allowance. This is particularly troubling because when you look at and we've talked about, you've touched on the aspirations that were promoted, that inspired people to come onto the streets. Many women who led some of the movements in July 2024 were inspired by the values that were widely promoted about building a more just, more inclusive, and a democratic Bangladesh, one where every citizen, regardless of gender, could participate equally in shaping the country's future. Those aspirations resonated with millions of people who wanted a society founded on equality, accountability, and human dignity. Yet what many of us have witnessed since the 5th of August is deeply concerning. Extremist and fundamentalist voices have now, who have historically opposed equality and participation, women's participation in public life, appear to have become more prominent in public discourse. Some of those groups have openly challenged women's rights. They've questioned women's place in leadership and opposed universal human rights principles. Whether it's through intimidation, exclusion, or political accommodation, the consequence is the same. Women are increasingly being pushed to the margins of public and political life in Bangladesh. And as you mentioned, I watched this from the UK, but I have colleagues, friends doing frontline health and social work in Dhaka and around Bangladesh. And they describe there's a consistent pattern developing here. The women who were most visible in July are the ones who got pushed furthest to the margins after August 5th. That is what happens when nobody in the room is obligated to fight for a different number. And it is doubly hard to watch because the infrastructure for women in power already existed in this country, as you've also touched on. It did not survive this transition following August 5th. Back to you, Dr. Jamil.
Thank you, Ms. Chaudhary. Your role as a social justice proponent, activist really shines through in what you have just said. And indeed, I find it, I guess we all find it quite disturbing for a country where we started with such how women empowerment is seeing how women are being silenced every day with different aspects of the society. So I'd like to now come to Ms. Anberg for her input. We have heard Ms. Chaudhary put some groundwork underneath the numbers and statistics that Jihan showed. I'd like for you to kind of come back to the underlying things of what Ms. Chaudhary has just said, what she has just described in terms of what's happening in Bangladesh. So my question to you, Ms. Anberg, is this. What does this data actually say about what happened to women's safety in the same window to you?
Thank you, Dr. Jamil. Yes, we have seen quite a bit of data, both Jihanwei has shown and Jasmine have talked about, which is very important because data helps us to visualize how bad the scenario is right now in Bangladesh. So this is how I am seeing it right now. To be fair, there has been some legal progress, which we have seen, but which I will touch upon. Earlier this year, there was 2 regulations that has been introduced, one addressing sexual harassment in workplaces and also educational institutions, and another straightening protecting against domestic violence. For the first time, both also covers the both online harassment and in real life harassment, and that is supposedly set to 90 days timeline for the investigations. But to the larger scenario, if we look at it, the question remains: Bangladesh, the UN conventions on the eliminations of all forms of discrimination against women back in 1984. Yet more than 4 decades later, the country still maintains reservations on Article 2, which is guarantees, and Article 16, which is guarantees equality within marriage and families. So while new law may promises quicker investigations, the broader legal framework still stops. It's quite that you would see that something is happening, but underline it's not really happening anything. There is no progressions, and it's kind of becomes a stop in the middle. So it seems as something is happening, but we don't really see any result of that. So my thinking is that there is a huge gap yet to cover, huge gap yet to work on, but it's not moving forward. So we are still still at the backstage, and it's not moving forward at all. So being a woman and thinking how women's lives is happening over there, it's quite disheartening, and it's quite unfortunate that we are still needing to talk about it in 2026. So this is how I'm seeing it based on all the data that we have so far. Dr. Jamil.
Thank you, Ms. Anberg. That was short and to the point. I have a kind of a quick follow-up question for you, given that you are an IT security expert in your field. You're just talking about how things have not been done, things have not kind of moved forward. As a woman, and of course as an engineer, I was wondering what could be some of the things, in your opinion, that could be done or should have been done.
First of all, I think we still do quite a heavy limits of victim blaming, and that is, we have seen it's happening all over the countries. It could be not just in Bangladesh, but in different countries. What I fail to see is that a lot of the reports, I don't think everybody goes away and does the reporting at all. There are so many cases that we know, I personally know of, so many of my family and friends, they're almost a bit shy, almost a bit afraid, because first, what will others say and what will the police themselves will say? I know we have a topic that we will go into it later on. So there is a heavy amount of victim blaming, like, why are you wearing what you're wearing? Why are you out partying? Shouldn't be somewhere else. So, and if the police station speaks of that, so you almost don't want to report at all. So I think we are quite standing behind, far behind, than even talk about that, why it's not happening something with it. The culture, I think we are quite behind still, and it goes both online and offline. Unfortunately, I will just give example of myself. just being slightly in the front in online, the bashing and harassment that I receive on a daily basis is incredible amount. And it doesn't have to be, of course, now after 5th August, we being related from my family has a heavily involved in political involved. So of course, that's maybe I get special treatment, but it is incredibly sad that we have to still go through that.
It is, and I think that is the sad is probably the saddest way of putting this reality.
And Dr. Jamil, do you remember that guy that he was he assaulted some women verbally and then was arrested and then he received flower
Yeah.
welcome.
Oh my God.
So
So
this is the society.
embarrassing.
Yeah, this is the society today.
If we had seen that incident in a TV drama or a movie or read in a book, we would have laughed at it, right? That this is
Yeah.
so nonsense, this is so fake. Nothing like this happens in real life. But this is real life. And on top of it, many of the people who are cheering were the students of Dhaka University, right? This is our highest educational institution of the country. It just does not make sense at all. And as Mr. Anberg was saying, like the whole culture of that victim blaming, and more importantly, as Muslims, we feel being raped is our fault, or society makes it sound that way, right? The whole notion of we have to keep it a secret. Worst cases, the victim is forced to get married to the rapist. Like, I really cannot fathom, and I'm not even a woman, right? I really don't know the amount of trauma that person must go through in such situations. Only last week or so, I read that a child who was raped, and everybody knew the culprits, and then the families and the agents of the culprits sat down and said, in the name of Islam, let us forget this and move forward. This came in the newspapers.
And this is quite
Absolutely
normal,
wrong.
isn't it? This is something that you would think would happen in the dark ages, and in 2026, this is just unimaginable. Any part of the world, it's not something that you would expect in any civil society, would you?
The saddest part is that I feel like since 5th August, these scenarios has been more normalized by our quite a bit of social shamans that we know of, and both the social part and also the maybe a bit not that educated, but even I think we have been doing quite a normalized. We have bashing people, yelling at people, naming them, ripping their clothes off on the road. That is quite normalized now, and they just, oh, it's just mobbing. They had some feelings from whatever. It should be all right. So it should be all right. So can you imagine people like us that are quite, put together and educated, and we supposed to be very bravest and front. Even we think like, should we be even saying that? What happens if we say that? What happens to our family that are still in Bangladesh? What happens to them? I back of my mind, I do think of that. So I'm not shy of saying that. I do think of that. What happens to them if I say this? They will find them.
Of course, and we thought that now that an election has taken place, a new government has come to power, perhaps the dark times of the Jamaat Yunus regime would be over, but it is not. You're talking about normalizing the crimes. Look at all the killings that's going on. With the tag that you are somehow related to Awami League, it's your death, your killing is being justified. We kind of digress from our topic about women, but this is a very, very powerful example about normalizing crimes, and the government is not doing anything. So let us move on to our next question. I'd like to come to Ms. Chaudhary with that, if I may. So for the last several minutes, we have talking about what is happening in Bangladesh in terms of numbers, in terms of context. And then Ms. Anberg just talked about several of the things to make it concrete. I was wondering the examples that is happening, Ms. Chaudhary, If you could walk us through what specifically happened in Kaliganj, Bangladesh, please.
Sure. So the case in Kaliganj is deeply disturbing, not only because of the horrific violence inflicted on one woman, but because it reflects on a broader pattern that we have been discussing, that many women's rights advocates in Bangladesh and beyond Bangladesh have warned us about. So in Kaliganj, we saw a 40-year-old widow, a Hindu woman, who alleged that two men, Shaheen and Hassan, raped her, then tied her to a tree, cut off her hair, filmed it. The video was circulated. Two more people were named as Rupali Khatun and Musammad Mukhtar, were named in the public humiliation of this particular victim. Only one of the four, Hassan, was ever reported arrested. Now, we checked on this case ahead of tonight's episode, and what we found is a charge sheet, a trial date. None of this, there is nothing. And as of this recording, nothing in the 6 months that have passed other than silence on this case exists. And this case actually made the international headlines in that week when it happened. So you could imagine, what is happening to the thousands of cases where it doesn't even make those headlines. So this is not simply a failure of one investigation. It sends a powerful message here about whose rights are protected, whose suffering is allowed to fade from public attention. And when survivors see cases of such gravity languish without any visible accountability, it undermines the confidence in rule of law. Justice delayed in any case of gender-based violence, as we know, is not a procedural issue alone. It becomes a form of injustice in itself. It emboldens perpetrators, discourages survivors from coming forward, and it reinforces a culture of impunity. There is a connection worth making here on what Mr. Jihan referred to earlier on in his presentation. So he discussed the Hefazat rally in last May, the one where they were demanding that the Women's Commission should be scrapped. There was an incident at Dhaka University's TSC, where a hanging portrait of a woman stuck with shoes, sari torn off. The organizers claimed this was targeted at a Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, as if that makes it justifiable. So, they intended to say this didn't apply to women broadly, but the image that traveled was a crowd of men. What we saw was a crowd of men publicly desecrating a woman. This is the image and there is symbolism which does not, it doesn't need a court case. It only needs an audience. So put the two things together side by side. A widow with no charge sheet 6 months later, a rally where humiliating a woman's image was the visual that made all the news. Impunity here does not always need a religious permission slip, but when it does, it moves faster. So societies communicate value not only through laws and policies, but through what they tolerate, what they celebrate, or what they fail to condemn. Public acts that demean women contribute to an environment in which misogyny is normalized and violence against women and girls becomes easier to justify or dismiss. And these patterns should concern anyone who lives in a civilized society, anyone who's committed to democracy and the rule of law, irrespective of any political affiliation. And as Ms. Anberg alluded to, Bangladesh has also made some commitments under the Convention of Elimination of All Form of Discrimination Against Women, under the CEDAW, in short, agreement. I would also like to sort of add the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 5, on achieving gender equality and eliminating violence against women and girls. The true measure of these commitments is not simply signing international agreements, but in ensuring that every survivor receives justice, every perpetrator is held accountable, and every woman participate in public life and can live free from fear. Back to you, Mr. Jamil.
So very eloquently put, Ms. Chaudhary. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I was glued to what you are saying. And indeed, in many cases, especially in Bangladesh right now, it does seem like what you said, that justice delayed is equaling to justice denied. Right? We're seeing that in so many cases, people are just remaining quiet and quiet. And this whole misogyny was extremely evident from pretty much day one. When Hefazat Islam brought in 20,000 plus members to protest against the Women's Commission's recommendations, we saw that their own vice president, Mr. Khalid Hussein, I believe his name, he was a sitting advisor to Jamaat Yunus's regime, right? And so we knew from that moment that nothing's going to come out of the several hundred recommendations that women made. In 2026, we have to sit and say, hey, women and men should have equal rights under the law. We have to say it. We have to ask for it. Anyway, let's move on. I'd like to come to Ms. Anberg now, if I may. Ms. Anberg, you have looked closely at two other similar cases, like the Kaliganj one that Ms. Chaudhary just spoke about this year, that could not have moved in a more different way. I'm talking obviously about the case in Magura and the one about Pallavi. Would you kindly walk us through them, please?
Yes. So this is one of the two, I believe, more or less everyone in Bangladesh is very aware of, the case of Asia and Ramisa. And I know more or less many people knows about it, but I would still like to walk through it in case somebody hasn't had the time. So Asia was only 8-year-old, raped, killed in Magura in March last year in March. And the trial court sentences the main accused, Hitu Sheikh, to death after 73 days after the first case was filed. So this is actually genuinely one of the fastest verdicts in the country's history, if I can recall right. His death sentence still had to go through the High Court for mandatory confirmations, and one of the most recent reporting, as of today, what we know, more than about a year later, that confirmation is still actually pending on appeal. So it hasn't been moved much after that. And Ramisa was also only 8 years old. She was raped and killed in Pallavi in past May. That verdict came in 19 days. The Prime Minister personally visited the family's home, and I believe he also took care of the only surviving sister of her. I believe he promised her for her educations and life living, whatever that she would need going forward. I'm not going to stand here and tell you, how if the fast justice is a bad thing, although I have different opinion depending on which case we are talking about. But the problem is here, what happens if every case is not a national story, because not every family gets a visit by a prime minister, right? And not every cases we see on TV. This was heavily, a lot of cameras and a lot of focus on it got international, national attention, but not all the cases does that. So what happens to those cases? And just like on the same week, I believe there was hundreds more of similar cases, but we never hear about them because they are not on TV. They're not somehow got famous as a news. So my question is, before you even go to the part of the online, harassment, these are very real, severe cases. but there are more similar cases. They never gets to see the light. There has, I mean, if you just look into the filed of cases, how many we have in Bangladesh that never gets to see the light. Nothing happens. They just don't move forward. And like we were talking about, very unfortunately, privately, they get threatened to take off the cases. They tries to pay them off, or worse, they tries to marry them off. It doesn't matter how old they are. So this is like the ugliest thing we could possibly just imagine. It's actually happening. It's not a like movie, it's not a movie story, but it sounds like it could be. Uh, so so my it makes me so angry. You know, it doesn't even make me sad anymore. It just makes me frustrated and just angry that we're needing to talk about this in here like today, instead of their education and they're moving forward to like doing better things in life. We can't even give them the human rights. So I won't say that it never happened before in Bangladesh, but since 5th August, they are treating children and women like animals. I don't see there is any justice, and somehow both the previous government by Yunus and now BNP and Jamaat, they're almost making it seems like it's all right, it's normalized, and it just happens. It's an everyday thing. Nothing much to focus on, unless the prime minister name is his tech, and then they will do something like very filmy just to get the attention for 5 minutes. So that is where I think I see things. And I know I sound extremely bitter, but I am quite bitter after seeing what we have been last 2 years.
Thank you, Miss Anmark. Bitterness is indeed going through many of us watching what has been happening to our country for the last couple of years. Just a quick follow-up to you, Miss Anmark. As a woman, I'm leaving your IT engineer specialization on the side. As a woman, if you could imagine this bitterness growing in you for hundreds and thousands of women in Bangladesh, what could be a possible outburst of that, you think?
You know, you can be only silenced at a certain time, and I believe women has been silenced based on the circumstances they are being feared, no money, not much educations, perhaps, you know, family pressure that you just have to be quiet or nobody will marry you, that kind of thing, and very unfortunate. uh, but I think women will raise again, because there are women like us still speaking, and there are, I know, hundreds and thousands more are speaking. Maybe not perhaps on these talk shows, but they are trying the best they can, being the circumstances they are. It's very hard. You know, I think it's, for me, I'm very privileged to be sitting here and speaking what I want, but it's not that easy in Bangladesh. It's very hard. So sometimes I know even I sometimes end up saying like, why are they quiet? How hard is it to speak up? But it's unfair. It's not that easy. Only the person that are in that circumstances in Bangladesh, with the fully government funded culture that's being fed right now, it's very hard, and you don't have the power to do that. You are almost believe that the quieter you are, the better for you going forward. But I would still hope, Dr. Jamil, that our women will start to speak up, whether by voicing, whether by writing, whether by being, you know, anonymous, but write somewhere, tell someone. If you can't, tell a friend, tell a family, or ask someone else to be your voice, something.
And this ties in very well with what you said earlier about people being afraid. Even those of us who are perhaps not in the country, we always think, what would be the consequence of our actions, our words, to our families and friends back in Bangladesh, right?
Yeah,
And I'm
absolutely.
sure it's more so for the people who are living in Bangladesh. And another point to think about why perhaps many are still not opening up is because we have seen examples where women who have spoken, who have opened up, were actually killed, right? And nothing has been done about that. So those are examples that, hey, I'm free to rape you with all my goons, but if you protest, if you say something or do anything about it, your life or your family's life will be at stake. So it's beyond bitter. So I'd like to now come to Mr. Jihan, please. Jihan, you have been sitting, listening to us after your wonderful data walkthrough. Uh, my question to you now is this. So you built our data walk tonight, connecting the Jamaat Yunus regime straight through to the current Jamaat BNP regime. Some people might say that that is not fair. The Jamaat Yunus regime was in power for just little over 18 months or so, and now the Jamaat BNP regime has been there for about 6 to 8 months or so. So this may not be fair. So please make the case for why you are drawing that line, drawing that connection anyways. Jihan, to you.
Thank you, Dr. Jamil. So let me start by saying it. Morning shows the day. Morning shows the day, how the day will be. Now I'm going to make my case very carefully here, because a careful case is more important than a loosely tied one. And I'm going to try to look into evidence, because evidence matters. And in this show, we don't talk nonsense. We try to portray the situation as exactly as it is. And what the evidence suggests is that the condition that women are facing, there are some reasons behind it. And the reasons are structural conditions in Bangladesh, weak enforcement, survivor intimidation, and then, as Ms. Anberg has said, victim blaming, low political representation, and unimplemented reform. Now, all these reasons were there under the Yunus administration, and they crossed over the finish line to this BMP administration untouched. Nothing happened. And if we look at one example, one single example, it will be clear. In November last year, when Tarique Rahman was still a leader in opposition and was campaigning for election, he pledged a 5-point pledge on women's safety, both online and offline. Throughout his campaign trail, he said that he envisions a Bangladesh where mothers and sisters will be able to walk safely and freely. And this is a direct quote from his campaign. But 4 months into his government, on June 13th, a BMP leader, a ward level BMP leader from Jubodol, Mr. Shofik, I believe, he was caught on camera live assaulting a woman. And then the law enforcement also has seen that video. They have accepted that they saw the video, but as of now, there is no arrest that we can see. Now, as I have said, morning shows the day. We have to understand what BMP is. Let me ask all three of you and my audience, how many of you remember the name Sabekun Nahar Soni? Sabekun Nahar Soni from Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology, Buet. She was killed during the BMP government. So many people remember the name Abrar Fahad, right? But there was also Sabekur Nahar Soni. She was killed by Chatrodol, the BMP's student group. So this is the same BMP. This is the same student group that are calling the shots now. And their chief, Tarique Rahman, even before July 2024, was a convicted criminal on multiple cases with verified evidence from organizations such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the United States of America. These are no nonsense case, no nonsense evidence. These are documented facts. Tarique Rahman is a convicted criminal who is now running the country. So what can you expect, Dr. Jamil, from a convicted criminal who is convicted of grenade attacks, who is convicted of corruption, and all kind of not so good deed? So it is not that nothing changed. So many things changed. What did not change is that how women's safety are ensured. And whether it matters, the attackers belong to the party in power or not. Till we cannot fix that situation, till we cannot remove all these barriers, all the conditions that are documented by Ain o Shalish Kendro, Human Rights Watch, UN Women, the situation of women will continue to deteriorate. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jihan, for your input on this. I'm sure very few of us perhaps remember the Sony murder case, and that eventually what came or what actually did not come out of it. Many people are still talking about the Abrar Fahad case, but we know the outcomes of those were very visible. Even
No,
the
I mentioned it because sometimes to me it feels like that the value of student league members, the value of their life are a bit less, compared to the life of, that's how I feel. And that's why I had to mention that name.
Of course, and as we all should, nobody is claiming that any of our political parties are free or all sins, all corruptions, all crimes. But we have to compare apples with apples, right? Otherwise, it will just not make any sense to any one of us. Let's move on to Ms. Chaudhry now. She has been quietly sitting and listening to all of us in the meantime. Thank you for your patience. So, Ms. Chaudhry, let us talk a little bit about where the resistance to reform actually came from. Take us through what the Women's Affairs Reform Commission, which you briefly talked about earlier, actually proposed and what happened to it, please.
Thank you. So the Women's Reform Commission, at least on paper, represented one of the, I would say, most ambitious attempt to address the structural inequalities that affect women and girls in Bangladesh. Its recommendations, which it was 433 recommendations, if I remember correctly, including measures on equal inheritance through an optional civil framework, criminalizing marital rape, equal parental rights, increasing the direct representation of women in parliament. These were all intended to stimulate a national conversation about equality, justice, as well as sort of constitutional rights of women. We saw, as was, 3 weeks after the commission made these recommendations to the interim government led by Muhammad Yunus, more than 20,000 people were in Sorardiudan telling the government to throw the whole report out. Hefazat's leadership read a 12-point declaration where Maulana Mamunul Haq told the crowd that the commission had insulted religious majority, and sitting inside, as you have alluded to earlier on, sitting inside the government, and was the religious affairs advisor, AFM Khalid Hussein, a vice president of that very organization, applying the pressure from outside. So this is, deeply disappointing. And this is, disappointing because how quickly that conversation, if you like, became polarized with strong opposition from influential religious groups and public demonstrations calling for the recommendations to be withdrawn. None of it passed till today. Not marital rape criminalization, not equal inheritance, not the 600-seat parliament. And the Guardian's UK in the UK own reporting actually was quite direct about this, how Islamist resistance forced the government to abandon the equality proposals outright. So this is equally concerning, and I guess the silence around this is equally concerning. So many public figures and institutions that have historically championed human rights at that moment when fundamentalists were protesting in the streets about sort of universal human rights principles against the sort of fundamental rights of women, there was silence, and we know history has told us time and time again, these silences have consequences. It can create the perception that the opposition to women's equality carries little political or social cost. So the public debate following this, we've talked about the horrific rape and murder of the young girl in Mogura, for example, also illustrates how this matters. So following this incident, this horrific incident of involving this young girl, Jamaat's chief, Shafiqur Rahman, chose not to talk about the rapist, not to talk about the horrific, the crime that was committed, not to talk about the justice and the tribunal about against, to bringing the perpetrators to face the full weight of justice, nor the sort of backlog and the delays. He talked about moral degradation. And he pointed out how Indian television was behind all of this moral degradation. So, this is kind of, it does make us feel very angry, very frustrated, and it's quite outrageous when, when you talk about people, instead of talking about this horrific crime and bringing full justice to the victims, they call on stricter Sharia enforcements. That not only is, it's only not only celebrating almost the rapists, but when a nation is grieving an 8-year-old, choosing to talk about foreign television instead of accountability in its own kind of answers, what kind of people are in charge in Bangladesh right now. Back to you, Dr. Jamil.
Thank you, Ms. Chaudhry. Thank you so very much. As we come up on the hour, I would like to give each one of you about 30 seconds to a minute time to share, perhaps, if you have one image from tonight's discussion that you want people to sit with. If you have that, what would that be? Let's start with Ms. Anberg. Through to you.
Thank you, Jamil. I would say very short, how we had prior to 5th August under the government of Awami League. I wouldn't say it was perfectly perfect, no, but we had a lot better than what we have seen it could be, and a lot better than what we have today. Our leader, Sheikh Hasina, she worked really hard. She worked for women empowerment. She actually made sure from the lowest rank of Awami League to the toppest, there would have been women, and she did have women everywhere. I believe we need to move forward, make sure we work for women empowerment, including our children are safe, which is not right now. I hope that we learn to speak up, no matter what way we choose. It doesn't have to be talk show. It doesn't have to be very vocal on Facebook, but there are many ways we have to be vocal, or there is no other way. We have to make sure that we fight for our rights. It's about damn time. We have to, and if you can just have the courage to speak up first time, you will find similar to your people. You will find us, you will find more of us, and more of us united, and we will become powerful. And I think, I truly believe we can do better than what we have today.
Wonderful. Jihan, something from you?
Thank you, Jamil bhai. I will end with number 4. 4 out of 22. That's 18%. 4 out of 22 were on Yunus's council, administration, right? And from there until today, we haven't really progressed that much. So whoever is watching this, I would like to humbly request that raise your voice towards arranging a free and fair election and arranging the environment for Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to return to Bangladesh. Once Awami League returns, all these situations can be changed, but we have to get the environment there. Back to you.
And last, Ms. Chaudhry, if you have something to add.
Sure. So we know Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was one of the strongest advocates for women's rights, not just in Bangladesh, but I would say globally across the world. Women's issues is not a matter for just Sheikh Hasina or a woman. It is not a political concession or a matter of political affiliation. They are a measure of the health of democracy, a measure of the kind of society we want to live in. It's the kind of society we want our sons and daughters to grow up in, live in. A society that cannot protect the rights and safety and equal participation of women, cannot claim to be truly inclusive, fair, or just, or democratic. So the image of a widow tied to the tree with no charge sheet 6 months on, that is not a metaphor. That is where our life, that is where our file on Caligan stands as of tonight. I want people to sit with the plainness of that.
Excellent, excellent. So, visible in July, invisible since. This is not a slogan we came up with for a title out of nowhere. It is what every number, every case filed, and every silence we went looking for tonight actually confirmed. If anything from our show moved you tonight, let it be this, that the cases we named and the cases we could not name, they deserve more from all of us from the broadcast attention. Keep watching them, keep talking about them. Don't let the silent voices be erased. Keep watching them until even after we sign off. I would like to thank all of you for joining in today. I really enjoyed listening to you. I wish we had more time. So this has been the Persecution Report. See you again next week, same time, same day. Until then, this is your host, Raihan Jamil, signing off. Shubharatri. Good night.